I'm Carol Costello. Thank you so much for joining me. In Southern California, a young man wallowed in his loneliness and then looked into a camera and gleefully described the murderous rampage he was about to unleash. His parents, alerted to this YouTube video, raced to stop him. But by then, their son's so-called slaughter of college students had begun. CNN's Pamela Brown has more for you.
Well, Carol, we spoke to a close friend of the Rodger family. His name is Simon Astaire, and he said there was a desperate search underway to find Elliot Rodger as the shooting rampage was taking place. That's because his parents received the email he sent them with the manifesto attached. His mother read it at 9:17 p.m. Pacific time. According to this family friend, she knew something was terribly wrong and found his retribution video on YouTube. That's when she called 911, according to the family friend. And there was a desperate search to find him. They were in the car on their way to Santa Barbara, and that's when they found out there was a shooting. Their worst nightmare came true when they learned the person behind that shooting was their 22-year-old son. They admit that hindsight is always easy, and they too are asking themselves, what more could they have done? The friend says they are going through indescribable grief, coming to grips with the loss of their son and knowing what he did. Carol?
Pamela Brown reporting. There were warning signs from Elliot Rodger, but in the end, as Pamela said, no one was able to stop him from murdering 6 people on Friday night. In the weeks leading up to the attack, sheriff's deputies even went to Rodger's home, all because a mental health agency and a family relative were so worried, authorities were alerted on April 30th.
The relative had indicated that there was some concern about his well-being, and the person from the mental health department had then contacted our agency and asked that we conduct a welfare check to determine if he was a danger to himself or anyone else. And deputies from the sheriff's office contacted him. They found him to be rather shy and timid, polite, well-spoken. He explained to the deputies that it was a misunderstanding, and he was able to convince them that he was not at that point a danger to himself or anyone else, and wouldn't have met the criteria for an involuntary hold to examine him further.
Rodger wrote about that meeting in his manifesto, which CNN obtained a copy of from affiliate KEYT. This manifesto says, quote, "The police interrogated me outside for a few minutes, asking me if I had suicidal thoughts. I tactfully told them that it was all a misunderstanding, and they finally left. If they had demanded to search my room, that would have ended everything, because he had guns in his room and his plan was already in the works, apparently." Lou Palumbo is a retired law enforcement agent from Nassau County Police Department. He joins us live this morning. Good morning.
Hi, Carol.
This is such a tough case. Well, you heard what that deputy sheriff said. He said they went to his home, they checked him out, he answered the door, he seemed very timid, and they left without worry because the kid convinced them that it was all a misunderstanding. Sound plausible to you?
Absolutely. It happens every day. You know, we encounter people every day in the street, and when we question them, they give us the answers that they know we're looking for. And at that point, we have no alternative legally but to let them go on their way. In the instance of this young man, they had no justification to further their actions by forcing entry into his residence and searching and so on and so forth. I mean, they just did what we normally would do. And these welfare checks are a bit more common than most people realize, and most of the time, the focal point of them are the elderly. I was involved in one myself. We got a heads up from the family that hadn't been able to contact their father. By the time we got to the residence, the father had expired. He was in his late 80s. They're not that uncommon, and unfortunately, the police are limited or restricted as to what they may or may not do in conducting these checks.
Well, whenever these tragedies happen, people always ask, could we have prevented this? And some people say yes, if there were stricter background checks to buy weapons. For example, this kid had no criminal history. He had never explicitly threatened anyone. He'd never been voluntarily committed to a mental institution, so it was perfectly legal for him to buy a gun. Should that change?
Absolutely, and I've spoken to this for the past few years. I think what should happen at this point, Carol, is the federal government should establish a mandate that the states are required to follow. And it would not restrict or inhibit you from obtaining a concealed weapon, for example, with the prerogative to carry it nationwide, what it would do is ask you to comply with the same vetting process that we comply with in law enforcement, which includes but isn't limited to Minnesota multiphasic screening, Rorschach, word association, interviews with psychologists, criminal history, firearms training, and then education in a classroom setting to teach you exactly what the laws of force will allow you to do. I think this is a reasonable expectation, and it would not infringe or encroach upon anybody's rights to carry. If anything, it would give more people the prerogative to carry in a capacity they might like. And one final thing I'd like to say, we need to explore changing the ages for these children to buy handguns. In other words, right now, you can buy a long arm at the age of 18. You can buy a handgun at 21 years of age. Maybe we need to up the ages on these handguns to perhaps 25, because we're looking at this demographic that's consistently demonstrating their participation in these types of events or occurrences.
And I should have mentioned that this kid was being treated, he was undergoing psychological treatment since he was 8 years old. He had just never really hurt anyone. He never specifically threatened anyone. They were sort of these blanket, I guess, blanket threats. Does that make a difference? Because once you say you can't own a gun because you're being treated psychologically, isn't that a slippery slope?
Not in my opinion, it isn't. In fact, I'll tell you something interesting. Earlier today, Tom Fuentes, a former deputy director of the FBI, pointed out something rather interesting. In Virginia Tech, the individual who obtained 2 high-capacity handguns was adjudicated by a judge to be mentally defective. That was nowhere to be found in the community where he could purchase a firearm. We have a broken system here. We have a broken system when it comes to mental health, and apparently with the regulation and control of these firearms. So we need to sit down, put our thinking caps on, and start to problem solve. The point I'm trying to make is that even if it's reported, who is it we report it to? And then how is that information further communicated to business establishments, for example, that sell firearms? You know, we have to start to address these issues. The tragic part is this is becoming redundant. These cases are no longer an anomaly, and we are not addressing this problem, not in any capacity. And I don't want to hang the burden of this incident on gun control, because this isn't a gun control issue. This is a mental illness issue, and one that we just continue to gloss over.
And I have to ask you one more thing, because people will bring this up. This young man stabbed 3 people. He used a knife to kill, and then he used the gun to kill 3 more. He also tried to use his car to kill someone. So it's stricter laws, is stricter gun control laws the answer in this case?
Absolutely not. In fact, if we go back approximately a month ago in the state of Pennsylvania, if my recollection serves me correctly, we had an individual who attempted to, or was successful in stabbing 20 people, followed by an incident in New Jersey in a shopping mall with a homeless person who stabbed 2 people and killed 1. What we're having is a consistent demonstration of aggression or attacks with the one common denominator: mental defectiveness. It has nothing to do with the vehicle, so to speak, in which they deliver their message. It has to do with someone's mental state of mind, and the fact that we need to figure out how we're going to address, how would you say, disseminating information that these people are in existence, and we need to prevent them from getting their hands on handguns, for example.
Lou Palumbo, many thanks. Still to come in the newsroom, Pope Francis wraps up his 3-day tour of the Mideast today, inviting Israeli and Palestinian leaders to the Vatican to help build peace in the